Before I get started, here's my sketch of what I'm going to attempt to make today. Keep in mind that the plants are going to be real and not done in ceramic. This is going to be a plant pot when I'm done, and then I may or may not have enough clay to do the plate at the bottom. We will just have to wait and see. You're going to receive your slab of clay. Remember, it needs to stay wrapped in your bag the entire time, unless you are working with it, because you do not want it to dry out. I am going to get started making the plant part of it, so I need to roll out the slab to a 1/4 inch thick. To begin, I'm going to start by making the pot part. So I need to roll out this slab to a 1/4 inch thick. These pieces of wood that are on your desk are exactly a 1/4 inch thick. You're going to put that on either side and use the rolling pin to roll it out. When you are using the rolling pin, you're probably going to have to stand up so that way you have enough leverage to press it down. And then also notice that I am not using the handles. I am using and rolling the center barrel. You want to roll out more of a rectangular shape because I'm trying to make a long pot. So make sure you leave enough room to trim this down to be the right size. This is called the slab method. It is usually rectangular, and then we cut out the length we think it's going to be and stand it up on end to connect it together, kind of like a cylinder. It can be any shape that you need to make yours. The base of it can be any shape that you need to make your piece as well. You have a lot of freedom to choose how you want to do this. So make sure you take the time to plan it out. So now that your slab is all rolled out, make sure that it is not stuck to your canvas. So I like to pick it up and flip it over. This is already the exact thickness that we need all the way around. So now you're going to start by cutting out your rectangular. You can use the piece of wood as a straight edge as well. Just simply place it on your slab very gently and use either the needle tool or the tongue depressor as a tool to slice through your clay. Make sure when you do this, just like any straight edge, that you hold it still with one hand while you're tracing/cutting with the other hand. Once you remove it, you should have a perfectly straight side. Because I'm trying to make a rectangle, I'm going to try and keep this as parallel as possible. Make sure you're considering things like how big of a pot do you want? Do you want things to go at an angle when you're finished? Like, is the pot going to get bigger at the top or bowl, whatever it is you are trying to make. Now that the top and bottom are made, I'm going to store this extra clay in a bag so it doesn't dry out while I'm working with the rest of this. Make sure you place it into your bag and you wrap it up nice and tight. I sometimes, if it felt a little dry to me, going to put 1 or 2 sprays of water into the bag as well. Wrap it up, twist it, and then you're going to set the clay on top of that twist so that way no air can get inside. Now I can stand this up and I can see how it's going to wrap around to create my cylinder shape. Remember that the clay you have is limited, so you have to estimate what you still want to make and add on to your piece. So I'm playing around with the different sizes, and I actually wanted to make this a little bit shorter. So I'm going back in and cutting off excess. All right, you want your piece to overlap at least just a little bit, so that way you can make sure you get it the right size and we have some room to work with cutting our piece. So once you get it to the right size that you want, make sure it is completely solid all the way down. Check the inside Don't make the mistake I'm about to. Use your needle tool, and you are going to slice through both of them in the same spot. I will create what is called a mitered edge, and it will make it go together a lot smoother. So I'm first going to cut at an angle through that first piece, and then line up the needle tool with the second piece at the exact same angle. Here's where it's talking about you make sure it goes all the way through. Don't make the mistake I did. So now I'm cutting through that second piece with that same angle. And now what should happen is it should match up perfectly as a mitered edge. Now we can't just simply push it together because it's not going to hold. Anytime you want to attach something together that is clay, it has to be slipped and scored. My mitered edge is ready for me to slip and score. It is a lot easier to slip and score when the piece is not standing up. So I laid it down, and I'm first going to go through, and I like to score first. It really doesn't matter what order, it's just a preference. I go in one direction, and then I change directions and go back the other way. So it's kind of making an X on it all the way through. You need to do this to both edges or both pieces whenever you're attaching something together. Once it is quickly scored, then I'm going to go in with my slip and apply slip to both sides. Be very careful because these edges are very fragile because they are mitered, but it will make for a stronger hold once you're finished. So now I have stand them up and lining up those edges. You're going to gently press them together from both the inside and the outside at the same time. Be careful that you're not squishing the entire pot. You're trying to be very careful and gentle on just those edges. Once you have gently squished it together, it is now time to smooth out that seam. You want it to completely disappear. If you need a little help reaching the inside part of the cup, use one of the tools to help smooth it out. Generally, the one that has a little silicone to it helps. Make sure that while you are doing this, your hand is on the opposite side of whatever you're working on, so that we are not just pushing into air with nothing to hold it steady. Make sure you have a firm surface to press against. This step is now complete. Remember, you are going to be working on this over a couple of days. You are probably going to have to wrap this up at this point. This will probably be the end of day one. So use your second bag to wrap it up. And then your excess clay goes in the second bag in your tote tray. You do not want to spray water onto your piece right now because you actually want it to firm up just a little bit overnight. So that way it'll be a stronger surface to hold tomorrow. Here's the beginning of day two. I've already taken out the extra clay that was in my bag all wrapped up. Remember before that you can start using this, that you have to wedge it to get all of the air bubbles out. Air bubbles equal explosion in the kiln and messing up your piece that you've worked so hard for. Using the heel of your hand, you're pushing down on it, and you just keep repeating this process, kind of like you're kneading dough, until you think you've gotten all the air bubbles out. All right, now I've begun starting to flatten it back out. I want this to be the same thickness as the walls of my pot. I am going to be working on making the bottom of my pot. So I am putting down the same 1/4 inch thick pieces of wood and rolling out another slab. Because I want this to be circular and match the shape and size of my pot, I am flipping this and rolling the other direction to make sure I have enough surface area on my clay slab to fit the circle. Here is the second slab. Remember to pick it up and flip it over to make sure it's not stuck to your canvas before doing your next step. I am going to take the piece that I made the day before, the cylinder, and we're going to make a bottom for this. I'm going to place it directly on the slab gently. Make sure you get it as perfectly circular or whatever shape you're trying to do, and make sure that you have a solid base on there. There's no missing clay pieces. I'm going to take my needle tool and carefully trace around my plate. You can either cut all the way through with this right away, or you can trace and cut out afterwards. Once you've done this, you're going to remove the excess clay, and then we're going to work on putting that together by slipping and scoring. Always remember to wrap up any extra clay that you have once you're done, so that way it doesn't dry out sitting out in the open air. Now I'm going to carefully lift up the sides of my pot, and I'm left with the bottom that we now need to attach to our piece. Carefully lift it up, and you're going to slip and score on both pieces. Every single time you attach something, you have to slip and score. So this piece was sitting on top of it, so that means we need to score the bottom edge of the wall, and then the top inside or outside ring of our circle. Once it is scored, I'm going to add some slip, and again you have to do this to both pieces that you are attaching. Once they are both slipped and scored, you're going to carefully line it back up, and then you're going to gently squish it together. I am going to start by using the silicone tool to kind of help guide the inside part and get it pushed out to meet the circle. When you are pushing, be careful not to push just from the top. You can collapse your walls doing that. So I'm going to go around the outside edge, smoothing and squishing the bottom before I pick it up and flip it over. Gently pick up both pieces, flip it over, and press from the bottom. Only press from the outside rim. Do not press on the center or you will cause it to cave in. Once it is squished together, work on smoothing it out. I want my base to be a little more round and curved, so I'm going to work on curving and smoothing out this outer edge to give it that effect. Now that I have the pot built, I am going to work on adding any extra details or elements to my piece. I decided I want to do a silly face on my pot, so I am going to be working more with coils. Inspiration came from. So we just use a slab, but there's also pinch pot and coil method that you could have used as well. I am going to be using coils to actually add on the details to my pot now. When you're rolling out a coil, you want to try and keep it as even as possible. You're not really pushing hard. The softer you are, the easier it is to keep it as an actual coil rather than accidentally flattening out one part. I'm also kind of moving my hand back and forth to keep it even, using the palm of my hand and not the fingertips, because that will create ridges in your coil. Make sure you double check the size, that it is what you need it to be for your piece. Before I attach my coil to my pot, I'm going to lightly sketch the design onto my pot because I can always smooth it away after. Make sure you get the size right. So I'm sketching in her glasses first. I want this to be kind of silly, so I'm going to make them crooked and wonky. So something like this. I'm also going to go ahead and sketch in her nose and her lips. Now with a face, when I put a plant in there, it'll kind of look like she has hair. Now that I have the plan laid out, I'm going to go ahead and score where the coils are going to actually go. And then I'm also going to score the coil. Once you have scored both pieces, then you're going to go in with slip on both pieces. Now I can add the coils onto my pot. Be careful when you're doing this, not to push too hard and cave in your pots. Now I'm just going to use my needle tool to cut off the excess here of the glasses. I will continue to repeat this step for the other side of the glasses as well. Now I'm going to use this silicone tool to help smooth out the seams where it connects to my clay piece. I did put a little slip on it just to help it glide and make that seam blend in completely. So now you've seen that you can build things with coils and attach them to your piece. But you can also essentially just put chunks onto your piece and sculpt them while they're on there as well. So I'm going to do something like that for the nose for you to see. I usually start with a ball. Make sure you get it the correct size that you want. It is a little easier to shape that into the form you want by squishing it before you put it on. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm kind of doing more of a little bit of a pointed nose to it. So I'm using the table as the flat surface to attach that part to the flat part of my pot. Make sure that you score this really well, both on the nose or whatever piece you're adding and to the second piece. Make sure that it adheres very well and doesn't fall off later on in the process. Remember that when you are like squishing or putting your piece on there, that you have your hand on the inside so you don't cave in your pot. Once you have that form completely attached, we're going to work on smoothing it out and making sure those seams are all nice and smooth and everything is attached. Then you can move on to sculpting it. I want the nose to be a little bit flatter on the bottom, so that way I just kind of squish it on there, and then I can also go in and add some nostrils as well. I'm going to do something very similar to that for the lips as well, kind of sculpting out those pieces, attaching them, and then sculpting it once it's on there. You can do things like this in two separate sections. For instance, I'm going to do the upper lip and then I'll do the bottom lip to have a little bit of a separation between the two. Another option you have is that you can actually carve or scratch things into your object. And then once you paint it, you'll be able to paint a different color inside that carving than there is on the outside part. That part will make more sense when we actually get to the painting. So I actually want to carve some eyes. You want to make sure this is more like scratching the surface. You're not going all the way through the piece, or that will mess with the integrity of the pot itself. So I'm just carving some eyes to make her look like she has her eyes closed. Make sure that when you are done for the day, that you wrap up your piece gently and make sure no air can get inside. Because I think I have enough clay, I'm going to go ahead and try to make that little plate that the pot sits on top of. You can use this time to make anything extra you want to add to your piece. It just depends on what you're making. While I'm working on it, I'm going to let this piece sit out just a little bit to let it harden up, so that way it starts getting a little more structure to it. You don't want it to sit for too long, but just enough that you can still slip and score and add things to it without it collapsing every time you touch it. Remember, to start, you always have to wedge your clay back together. That way you don't have any air bubbles. Once your clay is completely re-wedged together, you can use this to make whatever it is you're trying to do now. I'm going to re-flatten mine out because I want to make another slab to cut the plate out of. I am going to go ahead and repeat all the same steps that I've already went over with you on how to make a slab. Don't forget you also have methods like coil, where you're rolling out the thin rope-like clay to add things, or you can also do your pinch pot method. Use whichever method works for your piece. Now that my slab is completely made, I'm going to set the pot on top of here gently just to make sure I can get the right size. And I'm going to use my needle tool to kind of gently scratch the surface of the clay and kind of trace the circle plate. Once I have the template drawn on there, I'm going to remove the clay piece and kind of go through and fix and refine anything that doesn't look as circular as I would like it. That was just a rough draft. Remember, you're just scratching it. You can always smooth it away. Once you're happy with your drawing, remember, if you don't like it, just rub your hand back over it to smooth it out. Then I'm going to cut all the way through, dragging the needle all the way down to the bottom to cut out the circle. Any excess clay is going to go back into a bag, wrapped up tight, so it doesn't dry out. Now what I want to do is curve the edges up so it's more like a plate. I'm going to gently work my way around, pressing it against my thumb, using my thumb as a kind of measurement to get the same width all the way around. Now that I have the rim made, I'm going to work on smoothing it out and finishing off my plate. Sometimes a little slip can help smooth it out. You don't want too much because you don't want to reset your clay to the wetness it was before. The firmer it gets, the better it's going to hold its shape. That is as far as I'm going to go today. Once it has set a little bit overnight, still wrapped up, I will be able to flip it over and smooth out the bottom without messing it up. Just make sure that you don't leave this out to dry completely and you leave this on a flat surface. I left my piece sitting on the counter with just lightly covered by my bag, so that way it is a little bit more like leather hard is what it's called, where it's a little bit stiffer, but it's still able to be slipped and scored or smoothed. Okay, this is essential for the last step, which is to smooth it. At this point, I can pick it up and not worry about accidentally squishing something because it has a little more structure to it. Now I'm going to take a damp sponge and I'm going to go through and really make sure everything is nice and smoothed out. So that way it is not going to have any bumps or any rough edges to it once it has been fired. I forgot about this part, but if you want yours to be a pot for plant, you need to have some drainage holes in the bottom so that way water can escape your pot. I'm going to take a small straw and then I'm going to go from the inside out and I'm going to just gently kind of push and twist as I go all the way through to the bottom. Because this is resting on the canvas, you're going to feel it hit the bottom. Then all I do is lift it up and the clay should come out. I have poked 3 small holes, so it is just enough for the water to drain out. Don't forget to flip it over and make sure everything is smoothed out. I missed recording this part, but using your needle tool, gently scratch your initials in the bottom of both of your pieces if you have more than one. And then you're going to poke little bitty holes, not all the way through, you're just scratching the surface, for the number of your class period. For instance, if you are in 6th period, you're going to have 6 little dots. Here is the final piece. Tune into the next video to see the rest of the process.